Hello and welcome to Group Chat. I am Justin Verrier, and joining me, Rob Mahoney, Big Waz. I would say about this time last week, we were gearing up to talk about Drew Eubanks and the cap implications of a swap of PJ Tucker to the Jazz and Eubanks going to the Clippers. A little different now, Rob.
Well, turns out there were some relevant cap implications. You know, and all of a sudden you can take Jalen Hood-Schifino. Now you can facilitate the biggest trade in NBA history. You know, turns out to be a pretty important precursor as things go, Waz.
Hey, man, I'm just grateful that insane things are still possible to happen in the NBA. I think when you do what we do, we become a little bit jaded and just like, oh, nothing surprises me. Like, we're just so like weathered by consuming so much of this stuff all the time and talking to people and talk about different scenarios and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just a great feeling to realize like there's still, you know, room to be utterly shocked by what goes on in this league.
Well, so I was at home on my couch. Devout listeners of the Ringer NBA show will know that Justin was on a date when the Luka Doncic trade news broke. We can get into that if you would like, JV. Waz, I want to know how you became aware of what was happening, because you were not inside, as it were.
No, I was distinctly outside. We had our event for Grammy weekends. Like, it was nicely well attended, was having a good time. And somebody passed me their phone and was like, yo, is this real? Immediately. And I'm like, I click it. Then I'm like, all right, it's the verified Shams. All right, it's the one with millions of followers. All right, this happened. And it was a shock. And then the craziest thing is that, you know, our DJ and the MC, the homie V Live, and shouts to DJ Night Train. Somebody passed him the phone and was like, bro, this just happened. He's reading. He stops the party. Literally, that clip on Bleacher and Sports Illustrated and all these people, like, that was from our event. He stopped the party to literally announce, like, he announced the trade. He said, I don't even know what else to say. Play me. I can't. He was just so shocked. He couldn't even speak anymore. So
you were like Devin Booker at the Portland game the other night.
Yes. Safe to say the Lakers fans in attendance were very happy about it. Obviously, people love AD, but it's Luka Doncic. Come on.
Yeah, a little bit different. We'll get into that. I think we're going to do some reassessments after a couple days of information has trickled out in that. A lot of stuff has happened pretty much since that happened Saturday night. But we got to talk about the De'Aaron Fox trade, which happened Sunday and honestly seemed totally normal, like a all-star fringe all-NBA guy going and becoming the number 2 for Victor Wembanyama, the presumed face of the NBA going forward. Just seems pretty normal, Rob.
I know.
But the full trade, if you need it at this point, Fox and Jordan McLaughlin go to the Spurs. Zach LaVine, Sidy Cissoko. What are we doing here?
Sidy Cissoko. Yeah.
Okay. Don't know him. 3 first-round picks, 3 second-round picks go to the Kings. Bulls get Zach Collins, Trey Jones, Kevin Huerter, and their own 2025 first-round pick from the Spurs. So I want to go through each team eventually, but Rob, what's like your top-line takeaway from this trade?
That's all it takes to get De'Aaron Fox. And in particular, that's all it takes from the Spurs to get De'Aaron Fox. I think San Antonio made out of this thing like bandits, frankly, given no Stephon Castle, no Devin Vassell, not even a Jeremy Sohan, no Atlanta unprotected first or future pick swaps included in this deal at all. And one of the first that you mentioned, Justin, that they trade is basically a fake first that's going to default into 2 seconds very soon. So effectively, Trey Jones, Zach Collins, Sidy Cissoko, 2 firsts and a bunch of seconds, that gets you De'Aaron Fox. Sign me the fuck up. That's a great deal for the Spurs.
Yeah, I mean, this is a no-brainer, obvious move. Some people might quibble when they eventually do give this max contract extension to Fox and say, oh, is he the kind of guy who deserves a max contract extension? What I would say is, next to Victor Wembanyama, absolutely. Because you have a guy that's going to elevate everything that Fox does And so it becomes worth getting into the Fox business, right? And so, yeah, the fact that they didn't have to give up any of their young nucleus for the guy, and some people might quibble and say, oh, him and Castle might be duplicative or blah, 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 whatever. It doesn't matter. They still have all of their young guys that they've clearly been excited about for a while, gave up, a modest draft assets, and they get to bring in an all-star, borderline fringe all-star who is still in his 20s to pair with their big man. It's just amazing, honestly, on their part. And just the idea that Zach LaVine, I guess that the league just looked at his contract as so onerous and so unattractive that the Bulls gave him away for a hill of beans, y'all.
Yeah.
Their
Not
pick
even a
was-
hill, a gentle pile of beans.
Their pick was top 10 protected. They were clearly going to be in the top 10.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And so this idea that we get our pick back, you were getting that pick. And so just to get off of LaVine for nothing, just nobody else wanted to get in the LaVine business, I find that to be shocking, honestly.
Yeah, I think we need to do a whole reconsideration of where Zach LaVine is, and basically the effects of rumor mongering and just maybe fear mongering over injuries has done on his value and just to guys across the league. But if we're going team by team here, let's go with the Spurs first, because that's obviously the biggest thing here. In addition to just the pairing of Wemby and Fox, which I think is going to work very nicely. There's some nice pick and roll stats that have been circulating around about how good Fox is and how good Wemby can be. And just to be able to unlock that end of Wemby, I think is going to be fascinating. It's funny because I keep finding myself wanting to be Victor Wembanyama hasn't played with a guy like that when it's only been a year and a half with Wemby. You just think that he's been here for 6-7 years. It's just he hasn't been with an all-star caliber point guard. What can he do with that? It's yes, he's a very new player, but it's an exciting complementary piece to pair with him for that reason. But also, I think you guys kind of hit it. The fact that the Spurs practically maintained all of the young core that they had for when Wemby was drafted. We got Castle, we got Vassell, we got Sohan, we got Keldon Johnson. We even have the old guard here to still rear the young guys with Barnes and CP3 just presumably moving to the bench and doing what he did in Golden State for those sorts of guys. There are options, but right now this team is suited to make a play-in run. And so I love what the Spurs did in this.
Let's just say that right now, just so we're clear, all Spurs-based bets on this podcast are null and void. This is a huge
part of it.
This is part of it.
Yeah, you always had the option to do
I don't
more.
know. We're gonna have to throw that to the committee. I think this might breach legality on the bet.
I think another thing about this on the Spurs side is when you have somebody as young as Wembanyama is, and that's as good as he's already shown himself to be, you can come into these negotiations from a position of ultimate strength. It's just bros, you see the direction our team is going. We are not desperate to make this happen immediately. And so you can come in here and ask the world of us. We don't have to do this deal. We love that Fox wants to be here with us and we think he's a good player and we're willing to give you, some level of compensation to get him in here. But I think, the parameters of the deal show that the Spurs are just guys, we will be completely fine. And they can say it with credibility just from the trajectory of their season that they are completely fine standing pat and the future looks amazingly bright.
Yeah. The other thing I want to do here is also do an accounting of some of the draft picks that went to the Kings and then also the Bulls got a pick too.
Sure.
Because I think one thing that's happening just in trade discourse overall is we're just looking at this almost as a dick measuring contest where it's Rudy Gobert got 5 picks. And so Luka Doncic deserves 12. And it's just what are the actual value of these picks? And what are they actually worth? There's so many picks being swapped for swaps that are now being swapped that it's really tough to determine which picks are actually good picks, to the point where I think the tipping point was Danny Ainge basically taking his short position and then changing that for a short position on the Phoenix Suns because the Cavs future and the Wolves future looks good. And so we're just completely discombobbled. Here's what I want to introduce here. Just a system of evaluating picks, a simple A through F system. Okay. And if we're using this specific trade as an example, I have given the 2031 unprotected pick for the Minnesota Timberwolves a B, because there's a chance down the road that could get disastrous. At the very least, it's so far in the future, we don't know what's going to happen. That could be a juicy pick down the road. I'll give it a B, not an A, not a sure thing. The Spurs pick that ultimately went to 2027 to the Kings, I gave it a C. maybe the Spurs haven't hit their stride, but more likely than not, late first. But to Rob's point about the Hornets pick, 1 to 14 protected this year, most likely going to be 2 seconds. That's a D. It's not like a complete catastrophe, but that's a D. And so what you ended up getting was...
It's not a first, though.
If you want to make it an F, I'm down to make it an F as well. If we're just saying that there's no hope that it's going to be a first.
I don't think there's any hope that a Charlotte pick that's that protected is going to convey this year. So that is going to be a second. So seconds are perfectly fine. And I think there is virtue in getting a boatload of seconds that can then facilitate other deals. It's not nothing.
From Charlotte, which would mean it would be high seconds, yes.
Absolutely true. It's just not quite the same thing. Okay.
But that's the system I want to do going forward here, because we're just completely past the point where we're actually even trading player for player. Part of the shock of Anthony Davis being traded for Luka is that it was an old school almost challenge trade. Just we're way too deep in, but that's what I would propose going forward here. Do you guys like that?
I do like it. For the record, Luka Doncic does deserve 12 first round picks, and there probably should have been more stuff involved in that. We can talk more about that later. But Overall, I agree. We're missing the forest for the trees, in the sense that it's just about the number of picks and not the quality of picks. That's why I point out the Atlanta deal, because there's some good stuff that the Spurs have that could have been involved in a trade like this, that a team like Sacramento could have demanded. I know we're going to talk about the Kings in a second. I actually think they did perfectly well in this deal, given their incentives and kind of where they are as a franchise. But for the Spurs to hold on to their best draft assets while giving up some decent ones, some rolls of the dice. I'm totally aligned with you, Justin, that the Minnesota pick is probably the best actual draft asset that's being exchanged in this deal. But overall, this is a perfectly reasonable pile of stuff to give up for a player of De'Aaron Fox's caliber. And I say that inclusive of the massive extension that is surely coming, that Woz alluded to, in part because, as we're putting everything in context, picks and otherwise, the Spurs have one of the lowest payrolls in the league. They have Victor Wembanyama and many of their best players on cost-controlled deals moving forward, and that will overlap with De'Aaron Fox's extension. So I'm not worried about the finances. I'm impressed that the Spurs still have so much to work with. And it was also notable to me that one thing that the Spurs do still have was a pick swap they picked up from the previous 3-team trade involving these 3 teams, the DeMar DeRozan deal, where they took a 2031 pick swap from the Kings just for taking on Harrison Barnes, who is now a good player for their team.
Solid. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the Kings then, because I think a big part of this is that they chose Zach LaVine over a big honking picks package. They got picks, but LaVine is the prize here. Woz, what do you think about LaVine going to Sacramento? Do you like the fit of basically forming Chicago Bulls 2.0 with DeMar DeRozan in him?
Yeah, I think it's a little strange that they're just doing the Bulls thing from the previous years that we all thought was pretty mediocre, and porting it to Sacramento to reunite these two wings. Whatever, it is what it is. But I think if you want to just sort of zoom out, you can make the case that Zach LaVine and De'Aaron Fox are comparable players. And Zach LaVine is going to get paid max money 2 years after this one. And, if you're just look, this guy wanted to leave our team and we've replaced him with a comparable player and we feel satisfied with that, I think they could make that case. It just feels like, nobody really got way better in this deal except for the Spurs, which is just, which tends to happen when you get the best player in the deal.
Yeah. But for the Kings to not get way worse while also getting picks, that's not a bad place to end up. The Kings have a lot of motivation to be good now, to try to make the playoffs, to try to compete. And yeah, Bulls West is maybe not the most impressive look in the world, but it is a competent one. And frankly, we should say, as that construction goes, Domantas Sabonis is just a dramatically better player than Vooch is or has been, and is also this season at least a much better spacer than Vooch has been for the majority of his Bulls tenure. So those are real factors that have to be considered. And ultimately, I'm pretty impressed that Sacramento made out this well, given the tricky position they were put in with De'Aaron Fox.
Yeah, I would go a step farther and to say this is probably the best version of the Bulls that we ever would have gotten, even in the previous iteration where Lonzo Ball and Alex Caruso were kind of ripping and running there, because I do like some of the guys that they have on the fringes, not only Sabonis being a huge factor in that, but also the fact that Malik Monk kind of coming into his own as a playmaker, currently averaging career high in assists. So I want to see him almost being the de facto point guard in this option where a lot of guys could be ball handling. I imagine imagine DeRozan will be probably primary in that regard. But like Devin Carter, we have the Keegan Murray leap that we've been waiting, like, what was it, 19 years for at this point. They have a lot of stuff in order to play above their heads in a way that I think they're probably going to be pretty feisty at the back half of this season, probably a little bit better than you'd expect. I think long term is just the pretty typical questions. Maybe like they were always going to face those sorts of things where it's like, what is our future? But LaVine, not only with the injury risk, just kind of caps them as like probably a play-in at best, especially considering the West is way more deep than the East, where the Bulls were doing this.
What makes them sort of unlikely bedfellows in this deal, though, is because like the Kings, I agree with you, are going to be pretty competitive and pretty good overall. They're fighting for a play-in spot. The Spurs are not that far behind them. And a Spurs team with De'Aaron Fox, of all people, is going to be dramatically better. It gives them a totally new look, a completely new element to their offense in terms of someone who can actually get downhill. And we should say, a guard who has a lot of familiarity playing with other point guards, other guards, can work with Chris Paul in a lot of lineups that could be really interesting for San Antonio. Like, I just think betting on yourself now if you're Sacramento and trying to be as good as you can now is a totally worthy direction and orientation for a deal, but you're doing it with Victor Wembanyama breathing down your neck effectively, and you're helping him do it by contributing to this deal. So you don't get to pick where the best trade packages come from. You certainly don't get to pick them when De'Aaron Fox is saying, I want to go play for the Spurs. But something of note, as we're kind of quantifying how Sacramento lands in this, is that they're going to have to deal with the Spurs to lock in that play-in spot.
And the Blazers, 6 of 7.
Yep.
Coming up. 1 win shy of the Spurs. We're back, baby.
The Blazers' mouthpiece has spoken. Yeah, I think that's another part of this is that Vivek and Sacramento's management clearly have no interest in, a down to the studs rebuild. They want to remain competitive, which I think is something to be admirable. And I think they're in a decent position to do so. I don't think they're wrongheaded for thinking that. And it's funny because, they do this trade involving the Bulls, who we've been killing for like just being on this treadmill of mediocrity for just years and never committing to just like starting over and doing something different. I think the Kings are just way better suited to that project than the Bulls have been over the past few years. So it makes more sense.
So much experience.
Well, look, mediocrity historically for Sacramento is pretty good. By Kings historical standards, mediocrity is no problem. So the fact that they can be in the mix and fighting for something, that's totally fine.
Yeah, the fact that they're literally 500, exactly 500 as we record this is pretty apropos. Before we go to the Bulls, though, I do want to take a snapshot of the play-in race because we're kind of talking around it here. You have right now 7 through 10, Wolves, Suns, Mavs, and then Kings. There's enough of a gap between Wolves and Kings. It's 2.5 games that like the maybe the Suns, Mavs, Kings are probably on a different tier. That's probably where it starts. After that, Warriors, Spurs, and Blazers somehow, some way still in this mix. Rob, what do you think is going to happen here? If we were to project the play-in mix, who are like the 4 teams you see in it?
Wolves are in it. Or, I mean, Wolves could move up, but I think their position, as you say, is a little bit different from the rest of this group. Dallas is suddenly incredibly, even more so, dependent on the health of its core players. And what happens with Anthony Davis's abdominal injury? What happens with Kyrie Irving's bulging disc in his back? What happens with the supporting cast, and when can Derek Lively get back? They are such an injury question mark now that it's really hard to place them. And I think that's where a team like Sacramento all of a sudden feels somewhat dependable in this race. Like they may be one of the more consistent and healthier teams of this group. And for that reason alone, I kind of think they're going to end up getting in. I could see the Suns having so many variables. Who knows what's going to happen with them at the deadline. I could see Dallas going really any number of directions, given how eventful their weekend has been. And overall, I just don't really trust the Warriors to do anything. Clearly, their play at this point is just to say, oh, we almost got Zach LaVine, just like they almost got Lauri Markkanen, just like they almost got Pascal Siakam, just like they almost got every relevant player who's ever been on the NBA trade market that they didn't actually trade for. So I think they're going to do something pretty minor ultimately and probably not position themselves well enough. So of this group, I think the Wolves are the sturdiest. After that, the Kings might have as good an argument as anybody.
Yeah, for sure. I know the Mavericks think or Nico Harrison, which we'll get into, thinks they're a championship contender right now, which is all fine and good. And, obviously their position in the standings is predicated on the fact that they didn't have their superstar player. for a month, and basically their fortunes went into the tank.
Well, they won't have to worry about that anymore.
Yes, but now, AD's going to add his production to what they're doing, and that thing will take a new form, and, there'll be a defensive focus type of team. But to me, the Spurs are ascendant, man. Like, they seem to be rising, just wind underneath their sails, and not just what they were already doing, but now, again, a clear talent upgrade at a vital position. You got to say the Spurs are going to be in that mix, and so this is going to be a dogfight between the Suns and all these other teams. Like you said, I think the Timberwolves, just talent-wise, they're on a different tier than everybody, and just wins-wise, like they've got a nice little cushion against, somebody like San Antonio. But the rest of this stuff is going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think that the Wolves are very much in there. I completely disagree with what you guys are saying about the Mavs. I think the Mavs have a chance to be very good throughout the rest of this season. I could see them very much being in the top 6 as a result of this, because as you mentioned, like their issue hasn't been necessarily how they performed. It's been health by and large. They have a lot to figure out here, but I think they could be pretty good. We'll save that for the Luka conversation. I think the Spurs very much number 3 in that regard. And then like Suns and Warriors, who the fuck knows? As we're recording this, like the Warriors are saying that they're out on Jimmy Butler because they won't give him an extension, or Jimmy Butler is saying he doesn't want to go there because they don't want to give it. It's hard to really track. I imagine by the time we're done recording this podcast, let alone tomorrow, it will be a completely different thing where they probably end up with Kevin Durant and we'll just go from there. But those are the 3 teams. And then it's probably Suns or Warriors, depends on who takes a step forward, because that's the thing. It's like practically everybody in the West is loading up here. It's going to be kind of a dogfight at this point. So those are the 4. What were you going to say, Rob? I cut you off.
Oh, just that the Spurs needed this. They've really been dragging lately. Their offense has been pretty up and down all season long. Getting De'Aaron Fox is a shot in the arm at the exact time where they needed a shot in the arm, and the exact time where even a good young team can have the vibes start to turn a little bit. And so to get some fresh blood, to get some new energy, to get some momentum, I think is really important. And we should also say, as in conjunction with that, this was not the structure of a deal that the Spurs could get done on their own. They did not have a Zach LaVine kind of player to offer the Kings. They only had picks and young talent and, some veteran ballast, but no one of Zach LaVine's caliber, no star for star who we could credibly say is like reasonably on the level of De'Aaron Fox as we have. The Spurs couldn't get this done on their own. And so it is only by the grace of the Bulls doing whatever the hell it is that they think that they're doing here that this kind of trade came together.
Let's talk about the Bulls. They're the last component of this trade. So again, here's what they got back for Zach LaVine, who I at least put into the all-star mix this year. You would say, I think, and everyone would agree here, probably fringe all-star at worst this season based on how he's performed. Zach Collins, Trey Jones, Kevin Huerter, who hasn't been very good lately, and their own first-round pick that they gave to the Spurs as a result to the DeMar DeRozan sign-and trade. So basically, they got some flotsam and their own future back.
Yeah.
But that pick is top 10 protected this year. And it is top 8 the following 2 years. They are currently 9th worst in the NBA. So on the one hand, you do regain control of your destiny. You don't have to deal with this looming threat in the background, but they probably, most likely, weren't going to fork that pick over this year anyway. And their reward here is peace of mind. What's going on?
Look, it's been 18 months of them trying to move this kid. And whatever, I guess to them, it's just like, look, we got this monkey off of our back in terms of his contract and his injury history. We get that when he's right, he's a very productive, one of the most efficient scorers in the NBA at volume. However, injury history, contract combined, they heard every offer possible for the guy. It's been that long. Basically, he was on the trade block essentially once Lonzo Ball got hurt and the season started to go a different way after that year, the first year after his extension or whatever, pretty much after that. And so it's been that long. They're deeply intimate with what the realistic offers were. And to them, unprotecting their first round pick was enough. It is shocking how little they got for Zach LaVine. And it's just, I don't know, it just makes me wonder, like, other teams that call themselves, trying to compete, trying to improve the talent, how they just didn't feel like Zach LaVine was worth the trouble. I think that's striking to me that the rest of the league is so down on this guy.
I think it is mostly because of the relationship between how injured he often is and how many games he misses and how big his salary commitment is. Like, teams get very spooked at the idea of like $45 million
of dead money
of dead money for a season at a time. Understandably, like that is a tough pill to swallow in this cap environment.
340 million of a supermax. Yeah, everyone just doesn't want to pay anything anymore.
Apparently not. I would say those are two quite different financial propositions, but even the Zach LaVine one, if you're a team like the Warriors, I don't understand why that isn't just like something that you're willing to do, why that isn't a step that you're willing to take. I don't understand, if you're Chicago, why a deal hadn't been made at some previous point in these 18 months when there were better offers on the table, when there were other deals to consider that would have brought you back more than a pick that you already would have had anyway, because as we said, they were going to keep it this year. Over the next 2 years, do we really think a tanking Chicago Bulls team, which is what they are if they're trading Zach LaVine, was going to be outside of the top 8 in the draft? They were probably going to keep it through both of those seasons. And so you're acquiring a primary return of a pick you probably would have had anyway, along with some perfectly okay role players for Zach LaVine. I just don't think that's an acceptable outcome, especially when the primary problem for the Bulls was that they have spent the last couple of years not knowing what they wanted, not knowing what they wanted to do, not knowing what they should be targeting in a deal, not knowing what Zach LaVine should be able to get them, even with his complicated trade market. Just like a complete blunder by the Bulls.
Yeah, if I were to mount a defense of the Bulls, it's that they finally, after years, have come to a conclusion that they are a tanking team, that they need to bottom out in order to reset this team. Unfortunately, they've just done it in fits and starts in a way that they really haven't acquired much for the players that they've had in order to just like kind of prop up this era of mediocrity that they've been on. Man, it's been a very long time. It's practically been since Tibbs left there, like a couple, what is it? Probably over a decade at this point now. And so I give them credit for finally ripping the Band-Aid and going down this path and believing in their young guys and trying to maybe play for a future superstar. But they really don't have much to show for it other than like, if you want to hang like the one playoff series. I think they have one playoff win in the DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, Lonzo Ball era. And if you want to hang a banner, it might look a little weird next to all the Jordan titles, but by all means. I'll say this though. I like Trey Jones. I think he's a totally solid player. Sure. I would honestly, if I'm a contender, if I'm like the Minnesota Timberwolves, I'd be trying to get that guy in here just to basically do Tyus Jones 2.0 for us. He's good, but that's the best I could do for them.
Perfectly serviceable backup point guard. And as far as getting your own pick back goes, the one asterisk I will put on that's to the Bulls' benefit is because they have control of their own pick now, they're a little bit more flexible if they wanted to trade future picks for something. But they shouldn't do that because they're going to be bad. Yeah. So theoretically, they are more flexible, but not in a way that's actually useful.
I'm just honestly shocked that the Bulls, a market that was, correct me if I'm wrong, guys would like to play in because it is a big metropolitan city. Like, it seems like they've just never used that to they're one of the biggest markets in the NBA, but they act like they're, I don't know, the Charlotte Hornets.
I think that's the thing. They are a huge market, an attractive market, great American city, no doubt about it. However,
Steel Town.
However, their ownership treats it like it's a AAA team. Their ownership is so cheap and just so like, I don't know, like the way they treat the team is like an afterthought. And it's like got this rich tradition, having been the team that Michael Jordan played, 95% of his career at. It's just, I think that lack of shine on the franchise is because of the ownership. And I think that's why they find themselves being rudderless all the time. Just bad management, sticking with the wrong people for way too long. Just this idea of just like, no, we're going to, be on the pedal, the sort of hamster wheel of mediocrity for as long as humanly possible. And like have to be dragged out kicking and screaming from the Jonas, from the Vucci Mane era. It's like, it's just so poorly ran. And I think that's what you're seeing when you don't see like this impetus from other people to be dying to play for the Bulls.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of cheap,
I want to bring up one more thing that may be a good pivot point for us, Justin, which is when I was combing through all these picks that the Spurs have come in their way as a result of all the other deals that they've done that allowed them to make this deal. There's one thing that popped up that hadn't really registered for me until today. The Spurs actually have a pick swap with the Dallas Mavericks in 2030.
Mm-hmm.
That could be pretty juicy going forward. That could be suddenly, the kind of asset that could mean something in a deal, which I did not anticipate saying a day ago, 2 days ago, a week ago. God knows. I'm stunned that we got here with the Mavs putting themselves in this position, but the Spurs could be an ancillary beneficiary of it.
All right, let's talk about the Luka deal. So we obviously, Rob and I talked about it over the weekend. I want to start from this point and give the floor to Woz because he hasn't had a chance to weigh in. This is a tweet from @BigWoz on Twitter. Maybe you've heard of him. This is crazier than the decision. Woz?
It is just on the surprise factor. Even with the decision, like Stephen A had kind of reported that we knew LeBron was probably changing teams.
Yes.
There was like this, and again, he was like the same age Luka is right now.
Yeah.
Like he was clearly the best player in the NBA. He clearly had so much room left in his prime. It was just like, this is crazy that this kind of guy is probably changing teams. But there was, I know at the time I was like, oh, this is LeBron. He's like going to do the corny thing and just stay in Cleveland and do the hometown thing. I didn't think he was actually leaving. So I was definitely shocked. But this is way crazy because there's just been nothing beyond. And again, and people thought I was talking crap. Like we said this on the show, like the Lakers, part of the reason why they refuse to move on from 2029 and 2031 first round picks, they've been telling people that they think they're going to play it. They've been telling people, we think we got a shot at Luka Doncic. And because the Lakers have been doing this type of bluster for literally like 15 years now, where
15?
the Lakers...
That's conservative, I would say.
Well, in the Twitter era,
sure.
Where people are photoshopping
yes.
pictures of every single superstar in the NBA at some point with a Lakers jersey on.
See, you say Photoshop, I say manifesting. The tides have turned in that battle.
Exactly. And so, there was an idea that the Lakers probably thought they could get Luka at some point in his career. Nobody was saying they were trading for him at the deadline. Nobody thought that. And so to see this happen, like the first thing that comes to my mind is like, it's an idea that maybe they got an inkling that Luka wasn't going to sign the deal this summer. And, the $350 million 5-year deal, again, an insane contract, supermax contract that he's already qualified for. Because just to remind folks, this guy's already made 5 first-team All-NBAs. He's 25 years old. Okay. And so I'm like, okay, maybe there was an inkling that this kid wasn't going to sign. Not that he said he didn't eventually want to do it, that maybe they got the sniff that he didn't want to do it this summer and they wanted to get out ahead of things. Okay, maybe that's the case. Then, you get to talking to some people who would know and around the situation. And it's like, no, fam. Like maybe Luka might have said, I don't know. We'll see if we're doing it this summer. But there was no indication from his crew that he wasn't going to do this. And the bottom line is he's losing out on $117 million.
Yeah.
Because he got traded. And so I went from thinking this was a Luka sort of I'm not long for Dallas inkling that Dallas management, Nico Harrison, the Adelsons were like, you know what? Let's get out of this right now and move on to like, maybe Dallas was just straight up like, we don't want Luka Doncic anymore, which to me is professional malpractice. Like, I just didn't want to jump on because I think with people in our profession, because all of their contacts around the league hadn't heard it, because everybody basically got scooped. Everybody's taken by surprise. There's this like what feels like knee-jerk, like Nico Harrison is a complete and utter idiot. And that's the only way this could have happened without us seeing it coming, right? Yep. Which I just want to go against, like this idea that like this guy's wholly incompetent. But man, I gotta say, man, the more that I talk to people, the more that I speak to people, bro, the more it feels like, yo, this dude just straight up just did this. And like just the idea that you don't sign Luka first and then trade him with the cost control, even as like people are going to be lining up to be down with this dude. I don't want to hear about. And again, you know, this isn't like rumor mongering. You talk to anybody in the NBA, you hear about the guy's eating habits. He likes beer a lot. He does apparently smoke hookah in the off season.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard that, you know, it's not crazy to think that the guy smoking firing up heaters every now and again, a la Vlade Divac, you know, and, you know, the old Yugoslavian guys. I've heard all of those things. That being said,
who gives a fuck?
Come on.
Just literally, who gives?
32, 9, and 8 in the conference finals last year. He outplayed Shai Gilgeous-Alexander head-to-head in the playoffs last year, who everybody says if he's not number 2, he's number 3 because Shai is number 2 in the world right now. He's 25. This is just, it's incomprehensible.
I like
that
the way
even if you wanted to move on from him.
Yeah, I like the way you frame that, though, because I do think the inclination is just to pile on and to not really consider the different aspects to this. And like, I don't think anybody in the position of Nico Harrison is just acting completely irrational. And so like the idea that like this wasn't spurred by X, Y, and Z, like at the very least, we should consider those things. And to that point, when I recorded on Saturday night, and we should mention up top, like probably wasn't in this state, both emotionally and maybe sober wise, in order to record that podcast. I basically just walked in the door, we fired up the mics, and I was like, oh, this is probably just the classic NBA situation where the player wanted out, they jumped ahead of them, and because they're a win-now team, they went and got a win-now player in order to supplement Kyrie Irving, all these older guys in order to do so. And I think there's like a perfectly reasonable line of thinking if that's the way they wanted to go. Unfortunately, it came out after the fact that it seemed like they, if anything, jumped the gun on the situation, and they're were the ones driving this. I think when you hear the first thing like Luka to LA, it's like, oh, he was going to get there eventually, you know? And I think we should factor that in because it's like, oh, well, why didn't they talk to Milwaukee and all these other teams where it's like, oh, well, you know, he has a year left on his deal and then a player option after this one. So he could be a 2026 free agent. Like, oh, there's like reasonable reasons why you would just go to LA because maybe he would get there eventually. But even if you're trying to think about these rationally, like you ultimately come to the conclusion that like one, they didn't even just get the best deal overall. And they didn't get the best deal from the Lakers because they didn't get like the extra picks and all this other stuff. And so
God forbid Austin Reeves, God forbid Dalton Connect.
Dude,
you couldn't possibly get Dalton Connect.
They also sent out a second round.
The second is the worst possible thing. Oh my God. Almost as if they felt it was incumbent upon them in order to facilitate this, in order to make it happen. Yeah, it's pretty bad.
They got absolutely taken in this, like absolutely hosed. And I'm with you guys. Like my inclination is to give people the benefit of the doubt, to try to zoom out, to try to understand it. But these are things that Nico Harrison said in the press conference after announcing this deal. It's not just what you have heard and what I've also heard, that Luka did not make any gesture that he was ready to leave, that he was trying to leave, that he was trying to go to the Lakers. Nico Harrison said on the record, Luka gave no indication that he was trying to leave in free agency, that he wanted off the team, that he wanted out of Dallas. He said on the record that he talked to one team, and it was the Los Angeles Lakers. Admitting that into a microphone is a fireable offense, like should be a fireable offense. That is horrific. The fact that you have, even if you decided, and I would never agree to it, that you should trade Luka Doncic, that you would not actually gauge the market for what Luka Doncic could get you.
Luka Doncic?
That you couldn't even stoke enough interest within the one trade partner you have artificially selected to get more picks, more players, more things of actual value from them. And I say that with no disrespect to Anthony Davis, who is a hell of a player, but the Mavs could have and should have gotten more.
Well, can we actually take that point you said about like asking other teams there? If this was a normal situation, and we basically have to have two tracks of conversation where it's like the normal brain versus what actually happened. But if this is normal brain where he only wants to get to LA, I do think it matters.
But that's not what's happening.
Right. Well, yes, but I'm just saying in this hypothetical situation that we're saying, like it probably would have set off alarm bells to other teams if they're fielding other offers from other teams, that they wouldn't have ultimately gotten the best package that they got. I think it would have been quite dimensional. We would have been in a De'Aaron Fox sort of situation where it's like, let's get some stuff and some picks and that's it. And then my feeling about picks where it's like, the picks weren't good. But having said that, they ultimately, again, didn't get the best version of the offer from the Lakers.
No.
So even if you're dealing just with the Lakers, they didn't get probably equal value or even close to that.
And there's also the part where once you declare it's open season on Luka Doncic, that's done. Like the Luka coming back is done. And teams, they're like sharks, man. They know there's chum in the water. And if they're like, oh, you can't go back and just bring Luka back. Like now you have to move him. And I think that affects the market. I just think even with all of that being said, man, like this is the exact kind of player, again, that it actually makes sense to move heaven and earth for because of the age plus the track record, right? Like the track record in the postseason, like there's no holes in his track record outside of, and again, if I'm going to be charitable to Nico Harrison and these guys, they're with Luka every day. Definitely overweight to start the season. He's definitely dealing with these nagging injuries, and I talked about it on the show today. Like, yo, a lot of this is like, yo, when you're not in shape, you do get these calf strains. You are like overusing other parts of your body that can lead to these nagging injuries, right? There is the lack of, 365 dedication to conditioning, to making yourself. And again, like I use Jokic as an example. He's not in the best, like he doesn't look like all svelte and all of that stuff, but in playing shape, this guy can go out and give you 40 good minutes every night, and because he's dedicated himself to that level of conditioning. Like the lack of dedication to around the clock, dedicate yourself to your body and make sure you're that kind of player. I get it. Of course, Luka comes with his own team, his own nutritionist, his own strength coach,
What are they doing, by the way? What's going on with that nutritionist?
Question. Yeah, if Luka ever fires you, I don't know how you ever get another job in that profession. If that's your resume,
as opposed to the camels,
it's healthy.
I just can't believe you do this because you don't think you can win with Luka Doncic. I mean, that just seems insane. Like this idea that this is like availability, as if he's like some Zion Williams or even Embiid, who, even if you want to say he's an Embiid type, the Sixers is just like, who cares? We're still all in. This guy's just too good to give up. And so,
and Luka is much better than Joel Embiid.
He's much better.
But as a playoff performer, much better.
That you don't give this guy the deal and then figure it out after is just, man, that is going to be something that I will have a hard time understanding forever.
It's going to haunt Nico Harrison for a long time. It's going to haunt the Mavericks franchise for a very long time. And they have pissed off a clear and established competitor who every time you light a fire under him does something better and better and better every single time. They've traded him in the conference to a potential rival and now have to watch as he becomes his best self. Now have to watch as he learns about Erewhon for the first time. And, he's eating green. He's doing well. The more that I have sat with this trade and the more I have absorbed the information that is being put out publicly by the Mavs, the things you hear privately from sources behind the scenes, I have come to exactly one conclusion about this, which is that Dallas had something really unique. They had a singular superstar creator who processes the game in a way that we've never really seen before. One of the most accomplished 25-year-olds in the history of the sport. 5 All-NBA selections, as we said, a finals run, a separate Western Conference finals run, all of these international accolades, a scoring title, the list goes on and on. And with that, with a player of that caliber, you make certain kinds of accommodations. You make exceptions to your rules for players like that. That's what teams do for greatness. You make space for it to be itself. And the Mavs decided they didn't want to do that anymore. They wanted to be ordinary. They wanted to be an ordinary-ass team that's going to be probably a really good defense because they have Anthony Davis and they have other good defensive players that's going to play a pretty traditional style. I just think if Luka Doncic doesn't fit your vision for what you want your basketball team to be, you need to change your vision because it's too limiting.
Yeah, I almost feel like it probably comes down to the personal element of this more than we're probably used to for this. Not only because Nico Harrison is, he comes from the Nike background, and so he's new to the NBA world. I'm not going to try to discredit the fact that like he has all these connections. Those connections are very valuable because look what we've seen with Rob Pelinka, being Kobe's agent, knowing guys. Bob Myers, same thing. Those guys come from non-traditional backgrounds, have had success in that regard. But like, even if you look at the moves that they've made that have been successful, the Kyrie Irving trade, first and foremost, where he took a risk, made a win now move in order to prioritize the present, and it paid off. Even the Daniel Gafford trade, the PJ Washington trade, similar sort of logic where he prioritized what is happening now in order to make the best possible version of that. We were probably all on the other side of that thing. We're like, oh, well, what about the long-term effects of this? They're getting rid of all the picks. Like, oh, and it worked out. And more credit to them. They went to the NBA Finals. Awesome moves. It seems like he applied that logic and was almost emboldened by that. And whatever other like personal disagreements you have with Luka, the friction that he causes for an NBA franchise, and was like, I'm going to do the same fucking thing. I'm going to double down on this recipe for success and just like roll that in there. Get a guy in Anthony Davis who he clearly has a professional relationship with. Davis waived his trade kicker in order to be a part of the Mavs because he knows Nico Harrison back to the Nike days. And so it's like a big conglomeration of like ego plus personal relationships, plus like the fact that like he is probably working from a place of strength, not only because of like the past success with the trades, but also because he is now working for an ownership that probably doesn't know what the fuck they're doing because they just got an NBA team. And so like this big like word cloud of things has just like all happened in a perfect storm sort of way. And so it's like, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm trying to see things both sides. Ultimately, I come to the conclusion and it doesn't make fucking sense.
No. Luka Doncic, if your framework is let's get the best win now player we can get, Luka Doncic is a better win now player than Anthony Davis. You lost. If your goal is to be a championship contender this season, you lost. So I don't know where they're coming from. I look at a team now, and we talked about this some as we're kind of dissecting the Western Conference playoff picture. I think the injury risks are real, and that's why they're such a big variable. They're going to have to dramatically reimagine the way they play on the fly. That's a huge variable to throw into the middle of a regular season, especially in a race this tight. But ultimately, Justin, I agree with you that there is talent here. There is a structure of a team that can work on some level, and I would say work especially on defense. But the Mavs have gone from one of the most advanced playmaking teams in the league and problem solvers in the league because of Luka Doncic to fielding what will probably be the worst passing lineups of any serious team in the league. Like, assuming the new starters are Kyrie Irving, Klay Thompson, PJ Washington, AD, and whoever is healthy between Gafford and Lively, that's some of the worst passing lineups of any actually competitive team.
That's the sticking point. Like, I actually think that there's a pathway that the Mavs can be very good this year. And now let's separate that from the future, the next, 10 years of Luka probably playing for the Lakers. I'm saying Luka Lakers basically is one thing now. It's funny. I was going through the Spurs stuff and I was like, oh, Devin Vassell, he can still be better. Like, he's a good player. There's still a runway for him. He's 24 years old. And I was like, oh, Luka's literally 1 year older than this motherfucker. And I'm like, oh, look at all this future ahead for him. But if we're just saying this season for the Mavs, I see it. If they're healthy and they're engaged, I actually like the talent and the way that it connects. I think Kyrie has been an all-star caliber player. I do think the basic model that they've had for a while plus AD works because I think AD has suddenly become the biggest dog shit player in the world based on how people are talking about him. He's a top 10 player.
Oh yeah.
31 years old, going to be 32 in March, I believe. To get him back, I think is still a boon. The problem is, again, it's always in the finer points here that they're already talking about playing him as a power forward. And we've talked about this over and over again. This motherfucker is a center. And if you're trying to do him a solid, if you're trying to bring out the best version of him, get him on your side, you're probably messaging that he's a power forward. And even in the best case scenario where he starts at power forward, finishes at center, that's still not good enough. They should be playing him at center, bringing Gafford off the bench. Because why is PJ Washington, playing the three? He's the perfect four to play with Anthony Davis. You have the model where you have the Nico Mirotic types, the Ryan Anderson types. That bulky four who could stretch is actually the perfect guy to play next to him in the front court. I was like, oh, there's synergy there. That's great. PJ Washington is going to be great for him. No, they don't want to do it. I fucking hate it.
So here's the thing. The last time AD, quote unquote, played with real centers was 2020 when they won the championship. And J. Kidd was on that staff. So, you talked about the personal connections here. And I think there's a couple of things I want to hit on. One, yes, J. Kidd, him and AD have a great relationship. Nico Harrison, we mentioned he comes from Nike. He was the Kobe guy over there, but he also had a great relationship with AD in his capacity as a Nike guy. And also, the clutch part of it matters. I think, they got in touch with Clutch, and it's like, yo, AD is, more than happy to be there. Absolutely get it done. We won't get in the way of this at any point. And, probably they felt like they didn't need to drive the hardest bargain because they were getting somebody who they truly, really think is a great and a special player. Although, again, he's 31. We know what this guy is. Yes, he's top 10. Yes. But, I'm sorry. He's not going to replace Luka Doncic's production. Whatever. Another thing about Nico Harris and the personal touches of all of this. Nico Harrison, excuse me. Some people brought it to my attention that Dennis Lindsey was in the front office last year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he's since gone.
Yeah.
And, some people are look, man, who are we going to give credit to these savvy deals to? The guy who has a proven track record in his time in Utah being not just competent, a pretty damn good GM when he was over there, or the person who has absolutely zero experience and just traded Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis. Again, I just want people to understand all the angles here. It really does feel like management was just sick of working with Luka Doncic.
Yes.
Which seems wholly absurd to me. It flies in the face of everything we know about the NBA. Take Boston with Jaylen Brown. A mercurial kind of guy. Definitely, you could say the contract was okay, this is pretty damn expensive and all of that stuff. But they was no, this is the nucleus of a championship situation. We're going to pay him $300 million and we'll figure out the rest later. We'll figure out what we got to do with these other guys later.
There are 25 teams out there whose general manager and coach and staff are low-key annoyed with their star at basically any given point in time. There are a couple exceptions to the rule, guys who really know how to go along to get along. But by and large, these are players who make exceptional demands on a franchise, who put you in weird kind of philosophical positions as a front office and as a staff, and you do have to make exceptions for, and you do have to learn to live with. You know what it sounds like to me? That's a you problem, Nico Harrison.
I get it.
Do you?
Yeah, a little bit.
just you and a couple Lukas over here?
But unlike Nico Harrison, you power through and you just make do.
This is big of you. Zooming out a little bit, there is the baffling decision to trade Luka Doncic. There is the complete mismanagement of the process by which you traded him and did not pursue offers. There's the fact that you did trade him, and now you have to live with the consequences of that. And then there has been the selling of that deal. And I would say, in particular, the ensuing press conference, where I've already mentioned some of Nico Harrison's remarks. I will say overall, too, just has the air of somebody who does not understand the magnitude of what he just did. And I say that not only professionally, but I have become, as a former citizen of Dallas, basically a full-time therapist for all of the people I know who follow the Mavericks, my mother included, Mama Mahoney. I apologize for everything you've been put through over the last couple of days.
We're sorry, Mom.
It's tough times. For Nico Harrison to go into that press conference, yucking, trying to crack bad jokes, I genuinely don't know what planet he is living on and what planet he has been living on, where collectively the NBA world, and I say this, not just Twitter, not just media people like us, people who work in the league do not understand how or why this happened. And that's the professional environment that you are living in, where all of your peers are looking at you saying, what did you just do? And why did you do it that way? And all of Mavs fans are looking at you and saying, you traded away the player we have dedicated and invested in over 7+ years for absolutely no discernible reason, with no cogent explanation as to why it happened. And you're up here cracking bad jokes? That's the tone you want to strike with this?
The press conference was weird. I didn't watch it, but I've seen the dribbles of information that have come out as a result of it. And I think there's a pathway where they could have just sold this as what we just kind of outlined, where it was, hey, Luka's going to want out eventually. We got ahead of this. We are a win now team. We're going to win now. That's our future. And that's all you really say about it. But then he said like 9 different other things. And so he kind of like mixed the message where like, let's just say that wasn't even the case. He could have fucking lied. He could have been he's going to get out eventually. This is why I did this. Like, I don't know what happened. Like, this is all Luka's fault. Didn't even do that. And so like, even if you want to give him credit for that regard, like he kind of blew past that because then he said a couple other things. He's like, you want to be a defensive team, which was like, that was the worst part of this. Like they were already a pretty solid defensive team. And as we've seen time and time, the Celtics are taking 53 pointers a game. Like defense is a critical component, but you need the creators, you need the offense.
Yeah, they lost to the Celtics, who were like an all-time great offensive opponent.
Yeah.
They didn't lose because their defense wasn't good enough. And then the idea that like how you stop a team like the Celtics from blitzing you is more bigs is a strange hypothesis.
I would actually go as far as to say too that a huge reason they lost that series was because when they needed Kyrie Irving to create one-on-one, he could not do it. That is now not only your primary creator, your only non-Spencer Dinwiddie creator.
I'll say this: Spencer Dinwiddie been fine this year. He's a totally credible backup point guard.
He's not Luka Doncic.
And another thing you have to ask yourself, like, what is happening with the ownership here? Because they seem to be completely asleep at the wheel and just don't care.
Well, they have other things going on right now.
Yeah, I know. But like just the idea that you just let, like, this is like $400 million, $500 million in franchise valuation. You just let walk out the door. Like, what are you doing as an ownership group that you would let Luka Doncic, like, again, I can't say this enough. You can't trade Luka Doncic unless he absolutely forces you to, period. And again, to reiterate, by all indications from everybody that I've spoken to, and I've tried my hardest to be like, what is happening over there?
Yeah.
Luka Doncic was not who spearheaded this move, guys.
Nope.
Just like some beer, and other guys just didn't like that about him.
I know. Imagine an NBA player who smokes and likes beer. That's crazy.
No one has ever done that in the history of the game. Can we talk about the Lakers just as currently constructed now? Because we kind of went through the Mavs. Just fascinating. Just absolutely one of the most fascinating combinations that probably I have ever seen watching basketball. The fact that LeBron James still playing at an all-star level, but obviously fading into his waning years here, is going to be married with a guy who's similar in type, but like at the peak of his powers. Like, Rob, what do you just think this year for the Lakers? There's a lot to figure out with them. They probably need a center, let alone like maybe like 2, maybe even 3. So I imagine they're going to be still pretty active here before the deadline on Thursday. What do you think about them just this season alone in terms of what they're capable of in the West?
It's really hard to say because defensively, they were so reliant on AD when he was in the lineup. And without him, it's just been such tough sledding with those bigs. Like Jackson Hayes is not a credible enough big on either side of the ball. Christian Koloko, for as much as I like him as a prospect, is not the level of big you want for a Luka Doncic-led team. Like the goalposts have moved in terms of what you need from your supporting players. If there is literally any downside to this move for the Lakers, and I don't really think there is one, but if there is one, the pressure and the heat has turned up a little bit as far as, okay, now you need to get together a relatively even more competitive team. We should say the Lakers are 5th place in the West. They're not doing too shabbily at the moment, but they need to figure some things out before the deadline. I think there are a bunch of bigs on the market who could make sense for them. They were able to maintain some of their critical trade assets to make a deal like that happen. Whether you want to talk about Robert Williams, whether you're going to talk about Jonas Valanciunas, who I don't really like the fit of, Clint Capella, like there's bigs out there at varying ranges of salary and health and availability who could just make sense for the Lakers to make something happen right now. The bigger existential question they need to ask is, to what extent are they still, or will they be, a LeBron James team? Luka's going to have the ball in his hands a ton. He's one of the best creators in the league. Is the partnership between Luka and LeBron a thing that is happening for the next couple months? Or is that something that is happening as LeBron kind of goes off into the sunset and is handing the baton, not just as, wing playmaker to, upstart like heir apparent, but as face of the Lakers to face of the Lakers?
Yeah, I don't think they need to ask themselves if they're a LeBron James team. They're not. It's over. They have completely moved on from being in the LeBron business. LeBron is, I don't want to say wholly irrelevant, but in terms of the decision making and the sort of overall thrust of the team, it's now all Luka dominated. And, like it's now just like, no, LeBron, like, look, we're happy that you're here, but we don't need to listen to anything you have to say anymore. Because we now have our 25-year-old superstar of the future for the next 10 years. We are set around building a winner around that guy. Now, if you think Jeannie Buss and Rob Pelinka going to build some competent championship contender around Luka, God bless. I don't know that I trust those people to actually execute on what they've now inherited in terms of this massive talent. But the LeBron part of this is like, yo, LeBron, like you're ancillary to what happens in this organization now. We have the younger, hotter version of you now. And that has just been made plainly clear. Like, so even the stuff about like, oh, why are we taking a step back? Why are we doing this still? Doesn't matter.
Oh, no.
When it comes to LeBron and his chirping. It's like, bro, we have Luka, bro, and that's how we're operating. We're a Luka organization now.
So what I heard from all of that is you like him thick. You like you like the Luka types. Have a little smoke on a weekend types, Doesn't smoke all the time, but when you start drinking, they smoke.
You need to relax. But yeah, that's basically the direction it's going. I do wonder, if getting with LeBron will have some positive effects on these off-court habits that we've mentioned.
Yeah.
If he will ever be the kind of person that gets on a LeBron-type regiment when it comes to being obsessed with conditioning and being in the best shape possible. I'm not worried about...
He can also be obsessed with revenge, we should say.
Yes.
A very powerful motivator historically.
And that's another thing, too. I know Luka has always called LeBron his idol. He's one of the few NBA players who aren't Kobe-like obsessed, and he's always been a LeBron guy. I think there's always been a relationship there and a mutual admiration. I think LeBron absolutely adores the guy, too, and the kind of player that he is. So maybe that will help in terms of, finding a way to get Luka into a different kind of mindset that will take that I think would take his game to a different stratosphere if this guy ever took his body seriously. And on the court, like LeBron and Luka, like these are two of the smartest guys in the NBA in terms of IQ. They will fit in a basketball sense. Like they're going to make it work basketball-wise.
Two of the smartest guys in NBA history.
History, yes.
History.
I just think for right now, the roster is just not very well balanced. When you think about Austin Reeves being a ball-dominant guy, not very defensive-minded, Luka being the same, LeBron, even to an extent, being the same. They got to balance out the roster in terms of big men and supporting guards and de-emphasizing guys that need to handle because of Luka and Bron. But I mean, the Lakers, this thing is coming up. Aces, come on now.
They took Luka and figured it out later, which should probably be telling something to the Mavs. Like they're basically going to reorient their entire team on the fly here because they were just like, we'll take him, hang up, and let's fucking go. But you're right. There's a lot of work to do because even Austin Reeves, do you really need another ball handler, especially if you're going to keep LeBron in the mix? This is just, I assume, kind of probably a bridge year to get to a future where Luka is playing with the exact right players that he is. And I took some shit for saying that the Mavs are going to be better this season than the Lakers. I think that's the most likely scenario, if only because the Lakers just have a lot to figure out. Maybe there's motivation on the Luka side. Maybe, LeBron asked for a trade. That's something that we should consider. But there's just it's a world of possibility, but they're at ground floor right now trying to figure that out. I think the question, and that's another thing, if you're going to be pissed about this, if you're another team, it's not just the fact that you gave the Lakers Luka, it's that you also armed them with the sort of capital and resources to go out and shape the roster in the exact type of way that he needs. Like Reeves plus your future swaps in that 2031, I believe, first round pick, that can get you a good player on a decent market. So there's a world of possibility here. I do want to talk about LeBron and his future specifically, though. We're already starting to see dribbles out where it's maybe the Warriors, their big plan is to reform the Team USA trio where it's it's Stephen Curry, it's LeBron, it's Kevin Durant. what do you guys think about LeBron? Do you see him staying there long term with Luka, or do you think this is eventually going to lead to him doing something like that with the Warriors?
That's kind of what I mean as far as the transition point. Because with LeBron, at this point, I could see it going either way. I find that the possibility of him coming to Golden State to be quite credible. It makes a lot of sense for him, makes a lot of sense for where that franchise is. I don't know about the big, like, also Kevin Durant element of that reunion, but LeBron and Steph have been kind of circling this and teasing this for long enough that at this point, I would almost be more surprised if it doesn't happen in some way at some point. I just don't know if he's going to be in a rush to get out the door. I know LeBron only has so many really high-level seasons left, which is always a dangerous thing to say with LeBron, but we've seen him slip a little bit this year in terms of his...
slippage is there.
The every night impact and effort is maybe too strong. The every night, like, impact and ability to shape the game isn't there in a way that it was even a couple of years ago. And I think he would be the first to acknowledge that. He is picking his spots in a way that he never has before. Playing with Steph, you can kind of do that. Playing with Luka, you can definitely do that. And you can be a supplementary creator. You can take possessions where you are just spacing and letting him do his thing and being the guy on the second side who's then all of a sudden making things happen when Luka kicks the ball your way. All of those possibilities are there for him. And so for as much as I understand the Golden State impulse, and maybe ultimately that's something that's more appealing to him and he wants to be, you know, with his peers a little bit more in terms of age rather than be the sort of mentor for Luka Doncic, not to the extent that Luka even really needs that much of a mentor as players go in terms of his on-court play. I just wouldn't be shocked if LeBron decides to stick around and wants to see this thing through to whatever extent he can be a part of that.
Yeah, he already put out the statement that he's not waiving his no trade clause to leave this year.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if over the summer, as he took stock of everything and maybe decided he wanted to go do something like play with Steph, maybe. But I also could see LeBron, like, he's just proven that he likes being in LA. If anything, that's what we've seen. Like, he has not exercised any real leverage ever over the Lakers. Like, he's basically prioritized getting paid, being in LA, and he has one more year left on his deal. Maybe after, like, some people think that next year is actually the retirement year. And so maybe it is just like my last year hanging out with Luka, watching him take over the team and doing that. And because, like, it just hasn't seemed like getting himself into the most optimal winning situation has been at the forefront of LeBron's mind since he got to the Lakers. It feels like that. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so that's why I'm like, I could see him just playing out the string, retiring as a Laker, just moving on. He's got one more year left on the deal. Or, I could also see him, like, after next year, doing the actual retirement tour, doing the whole, like, my son wants to get drafted, Bryce James thing again. Like, I could see him running that playbook one more time too. Yeah, but in terms of being in a rush to get out of LA, I just don't see that. I don't see why he would be anyway.
Yeah. So I imagine that the Lakers will probably stay intact, at least with the LeBron and Luka part of this. Probably out there in the market looking for a center. I think Robert Williams makes a lot of sense for that team if you're willing to play through some of his injury concerns. He has been largely healthy this season. They actually have been putting him on ice of late, which is a little curious, but, like, he's the exact type of smart player, but also bouncy athlete who could protect the rim and also be a lob threat for Luka. I think, like, he's tailor-made for Luka. Unfortunately, I just don't know what someone like that would cost anymore, because I feel like this trade also just completely upended the trade market. Like, if you're getting Luka for AD in a first, like, what is Robert Williams worth? Like a low second at that point? Like a second?
Well, there's the trade market that Nico Harrison is living in, and then there's the trade market that everyone else is living in. So I think the Robert Williams thing is fascinating because the Lakers, they were kind of already in the mix for a player like Robert Williams to begin with. They've been connected with bigs all year long. But that race is heating up as teams like the Knicks have similar needs. Other contenders are going to be talking themselves into Robert Williams types. And now, as I mentioned earlier, like maybe the urgency for the Lakers has turned up a little bit. Maybe they have all the more reason. They can approach the back half of the season as playing with house money, and I think they frankly should. But if they can do a little move to make themselves a little bit more functional in the meantime, why not do that?
But where will Cam Johnson go? That's what I thought this podcast was going to be. a week.
It might
ago.
still be. Jimmy Butler's going to get traded on Wednesday, and I'm like barely going to look up from my phone. That's
Is he
the
gonna get
level
traded?
of kind of. I don't know.
Seems
it's
like it has to
Bradley
happen.
Beal, or just like let that guy hang out in his mansion, like down the street. Like I might choose the mansion. You know, like the terse little jabs he's doing on social media these days. Like, I'll just turn my phone off and just like plug into Kevin Love's like meme Tumblr thing that he's doing right now. I don't know. I wouldn't trade him if it was just the Suns, and it seems like that's what he's trying to do.
At this point, I'm ruling nothing out. I have no context by which to understand what is happening in the NBA anymore, which is very useful when your job is podcasting about the NBA. But I think we're all going to get through it together. I think we're going to try to make sense of this
Dude, it was
crazy
like a
world we
week
apparently
ago,
live
and we
in.
were just like, nothing's actually gonna happen for
No.
real. Like Jimmy probably gets moves. Oh, Fox is angling. Okay,
Yep.
Fox will
He'll
probably
get moved. Yeah.
All right, these will be some big, nice deals, and then there'll be
Yep.
some ancillary, some cap clearing
Yep.
stuff, like guys getting underneath the apron, getting underneath the luxury tax threshold. We thought it was gonna be all that kind of bookkeeping and accounting dorkery. Instead, the biggest trade ever
Yep.
in the history of the NBA. This is crazy.
Well, it turns out it was bookkeeping. You know, a team was just so scared of paying a supermax player supermax money that they had no choice but to take a lowball offer without consulting anyone else about it. So, congratulations to the Mavericks for getting exactly apparently what they wanted.
I'll say this, if that is the byproduct of the 90 different aprons we're now working under, is that we're going to see these like kind of nutso trades where teams are just throwing all NBA regular players to another team just to get out of paying them. Like, I don't hate it. Like, this is a fascinating trade. Like, we haven't seen anything like that there. And like, I'm so sick of just like going through the pick protections and all that other stuff. So for that reason, I like it. I like being here.
You're not that sick of it. You just created a whole ass taxonomy for grading draft picks. So like you're here in the pit with us.
I rise to the occasion. What can I say? I love talking with my friends about the trade deadline. I love being in this friend zone. You know, this is one that I can appreciate.
God bless and salute.
There you go. Thank you to Isaiah Blakely. Thank you to Ben Cruz. We'll be back later this week. We'll talk to you then.